Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast, a Ben Kinney training production, where we discuss the concepts of health, wealth, leadership, and legacy. My name is Chad Hyams, and I am joined by my friend Bob Stewart. Bob, how are you today?
Chad, I'm pretty good. You know what I'm going to start doing? I'm going to start doing like something just ridiculous every time you ask that, because I basically just go, hey, I'm good. How are you? Like, be prepared, man. Next episode, it might be something just batshit crazy that comes out of my mouth.
All right. I'm looking forward to what's coming down the road, and I hope all of you out there listening are as well. Now, Bob, one of the things you do at the top of most episodes for us is you give us that word. You kind of set us up for maybe our mind should be going into this conversation. What about today as we're going to dive into a conversation on asking great questions?
My word is inquisitive.
Ooh, big one, Bob. Tell me a little more.
I just, a lot of the stuff Ben talks about today, some people are naturally. I think like if you're an inquisitive person, like you ask a lot of questions naturally. Like my wife always jokes that I can get on an airplane, sit down next to somebody and just like literally have a 3-hour flight and we can talk the whole time. And she's like, how do you do it? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm inquisitive. Like I just start asking questions about him. And so some people do this naturally, but Ben has taught himself, I think, how to be inquisitive, how to ask the right question and really just keep digging. So I want you guys to come into this with an inquisitive mind. And if you're not one of these people that kind of is naturally wired that way, to figure out how to get there. And he talks a little bit about that today.
All right, well, let's hear this conversation that we had the chance to have with Ben.
Ben, I told you one time that I couldn't lie to you because I know that had I tried, and it's not because I'm this pious person, right? It's just, I knew that if I tried, eventually I was going to spill the reality. Or I was going to spill the truth to you. And for me, it boils down, and I think the reason I told you this, it boils down to the skill set that you've developed over the years that allows you to say not very much, right? But get a lot of information from the person sitting across the table from you. So can you pinpoint like exactly what that skill is?
Yeah, I think most leaders, partners, relationships, bosses, salespeople, just people in general, they're missing an important skill set. And it's one, they talk too much is their fault, but the skill set that they're lacking is asking great questions and then being able to listen and actually listen to the answers. You ever seen somebody on stage, Bob, that's moderating a panel and you can tell that while the person's answering the question, they're looking at their notes or thinking about what they're going to ask and they aren't even listening to what the person's saying?
That drives me nuts because I'm always in the crowd going, ask a follow-up on that thing they just said right there. Yeah, totally.
You ever had a conversation with somebody and you were talking to them and you could tell they weren't listening? They were thinking about what they're going to say back to you?
I see it in Bob's eyes right now as we're doing this, Ben. It's kind of right there. He's waiting to get to the next question already.
Right? You see that,
yeah,
right?
Totally.
People have not become great listeners. And it's because they haven't figured out the real power of questions. They haven't became masters at asking great questions and becoming a powerful listener. So when you sit down with me, Bob, in any room, what are the two things that I have in front of me?
You have them right now, a white piece of paper, blank, and a Sharpie.
Every time. Yeah. And when somebody's talking, whether I'm interviewing them, I'm selling them something, I'm coaching them, I'm leading them, I'm mentoring, I have my Sharpie, a blank piece of paper, and I'm writing down their answers. It forces me to listen. How could I be thinking about what I was going to do next and hearing what you're saying and writing it down? It's a forcing function. It forces me to be a better leader, friend, coach, mentor, right? Salesperson, whatever I am at that moment, because I'm forcing myself to listen. As you listen, you realize at some point you have to say something, which means you have to be great at asking questions.
Chad, this is a revelation for me because I always thought Ben did that because he couldn't remember what I was saying to him. Now I realize that he was just keeping himself from talking so that he could actually hear me.
Right. And Ben, you did a great job of diving into that back in our emotional intelligence series. We talked about that opportunity that you do. And what you're doing is you're kind of bringing back what mom taught all of us earlier in life, which is you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So listen twice as much as you're speaking. That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you're talking now about we got to ask great questions. So talk a little bit more about that. Where do you get these great questions? How do we know it's a great question other than just, well, tell me more about that and tell me more about that? Because we all want to sometimes just walk away from the therapist that keeps asking us that.
Well, we don't know it's a great question or not because we don't know the subject matter. So when we're thinking about it, we have to like fill our quiver with all kinds of questions that we can use. And we'll talk about maybe the different types of questions.
Before we go into the different types of questions, because you do have some expertise, some thoughts around that. Why don't people just in general ask enough questions? Is it simply a matter of I don't have enough questions in my
quiver,
in my
as
quiver?
he just said.
That's a hunting term. I'm not
That's
familiar.
a great.
I'm a city
That's where
boy.
your arrows go, Bob. It's a thing on the
Roger.
back that holds your arrows.
There's probably 4 or 5 reasons that I can think of on why people don't ask questions. 1, they don't give a crap. They actually don't even care about what your answer is, right? I'm sure you've met somebody that really doesn't care what you're going to say, right? That at all. I think there's another group of people that think they already know the answer. They aren't even going to waste their time asking you the question because they already know what the answer is. They could be completely wrong, and they're missing out on the fact that the best way to teach somebody is to not tell them the answer, it's to help them come up with it on their own. Well, next, it could be they're just afraid they're going to ask the wrong question. They're insecure about the subject matter, or they don't have those questions in their quiver to even ask. So they just kind of stare at you like my dog does with his head tilted sideways, you know? And lastly, you see this all the time. People are trying to impress you with what they know instead of getting to know you, right? They spend their whole time talking because they're so tied up in their own ego. So if you add those all together, Bob, it's because people are too confident, they don't care, they're too insecure, or they're too worried about what you think or who you think they are.
Their ego.
Ego.
Where'd you learn this, Ben? I mean, were you just magically born with the ability to ask that great question and you've just perfected this? Or is there somewhere that you started with these questions that helped you understand the power of them?
Well, I started in sales at a pretty young age, working on commission.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned through doing that questions were powerful. If I could get people talking, people would like me. If I talk a lot, they probably wouldn't like me. It was easier for me to get people to like me if I got them talking. Well, how do you get people talking?
Ask them a question.
You ask them questions. In fact, there was a New York Times article or Huffington Post or something like that out there that said like the 36 questions to get anybody to fall in love with you. It was a pretty funny article, but they did all this research about if you can work your way through these levels of intimacy through questions, by the end of it, the person feels like they have such a connection to you, right? That they actually feel an emotional or a physical or some sort of bond to that individual.
Sure.
My whole life, I've wanted to be better at things. It's one of my greatest fears is not being good at something, at failing at something. So I've read the FBI's Guide to Reading Body Language, the CIA book called You Can't Lie to Me. I've read books on NLP, sales, words. One of my favorite books was The 7 Powers of Questions. And it's probably like a 90s book or something like that.
Okay.
My first coach, Debbie DeGroat, asked me to read The 7 Powers of Questions a long time ago.
And you know what, Ben? We're going to put a link to that book right in our Facebook group, facebook.com/group/win-make-give for anyone who wants to get a link to that book so they don't have to go looking for it and hope they found the right one that you're talking about.
Awesome. Great. Cool. Well, inside this book, it lives up to the title because it talks about the 7 powers of questions.
Okay. So you love your lists, you love your systems. We know this about you. It's the easy way to go through everything you got. You just gave us the 5 reasons why, about questions with people not caring. People think they know it all. People are insecure and afraid to ask the wrong one. People trying to impress you with their ego or they're too confident. But now you've got the 7. So what are the 7 that we're talking about here?
The 7 Powers of Questions book said that questions give us the ability to demand answers.
Okay.
When you ask questions, you're basically demanding an answer.
Societally, our brains are wired to answer questions. I mean, it's ingrained in us.
Yeah, and the only way that fails is when you, the question asker, gives in before the question answerer answers.
Ben,
right?
you're one of the, Chad, you've been on the other end of this.
Oh, yes.
You're notorious for asking a question, and in sales, especially when you were on the phone making sales calls, asking a question and then just shutting up. And most people, after 2, 3, 4 seconds of silence, if they're the one that asked the question and the person doesn't answer, they start talking.
He who speaks first,
sit there.
He who speaks first loses.
Chad, this guy can sit there for 10, 12, 15, 30 awkward seconds of silence, right? So, yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen that.
I interviewed somebody once, and this person said, because my dad was big on a couple things. One, please, thank you, hold the door for people, be polite. But the other one, and if I didn't do it, he'd smack me in the back of the head. It would be, look at me when I'm talking to you. So I have great eye contact, right? I'm always looking at somebody directly in the eyes. And I remember doing this interview, and I was asking this person questions, and they didn't have an answer. So I just was looking at them, staring at them, waiting for them to answer. And the person said, I feel like you're looking into my soul. It must have been my super long girly eyelashes, but yeah, you have to be willing to wait that person out, because questions demand answers.
All right. And anybody who's worked with Ben long enough and been in a position of leadership in any of your organizations has felt that soul stare that you have. We've all experienced it at one point or another. All right. So that's number 1. Number 2.
Questions stimulate thinking.
Okay.
They force you to think and to give answers. Now, the first answer is normally the easy one.
Okay.
But when you can follow it up with additional questions, well, what else? Is there anything else? Tell me more about that. You just continue to ask. It forces the person to think. And usually the second, third, or fourth answer is actually either A, the truth, right? Or B, the thing that you're looking for to move that person forward.
So you're always digging deeper and going deeper on that original answer.
That's what the tell me more is. You use that one a lot. Tell me a little bit more about that. And I always originally thought he doesn't understand what I'm saying, but I came to realize that you were actually getting me to expand on my answer, or to think more deeply myself. You probably had the next 10 steps in your head, but you were getting me to expand on it.
It's the number one reason why companies give their customers the wrong answer. They don't ask enough questions to realize what the real problem is. So they jump to reset your cash or whatever these other things might be, right? Instead of saying, well, tell me exactly what you were doing. What'd you do next? Why were you doing that? Where were you doing that? What time were you doing that? And asking these questions, and it gets the people to start stimulating and thinking about what else could have been affecting the situation. And it gives you the number 3 thing, which is valuable information. Now, valuable information from questions is so important, but when you're going through that experience, you aren't going to remember everything that person says, which is why going back to the Sharpie and the piece of paper is so important, because you just start writing down every answer that they give. You write it down, you write it down, you write it down. You might look at each individual answer as invaluable, but the combination of 2 or 3 things as, that makes sense. You start seeing trends.
We do that a lot around software when we're in there trying to figure out what's going on or how this might work better, right? Look at a bigger picture, because we've asked a number of questions where the answers all kind of line up.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep us going to number 4, Ben.
Questions put us in control. When you're in sales or leadership or coaching, mentoring, you have to make sure that the car is consistently going in the right direction. And when I see somebody going in the wrong direction, I'll interrupt them and be like, hey, excuse me for a second, Chad, would it be okay if I asked you a follow-up question? Because he was starting to go down this tangent that I didn't need him to go. I want him to either go down this path of buying our product or service or go down this path of resolving the real issue that he's having in his business today. So I'll ask a question to get him back on, and I take control. The person who's asking the question is the person driving the car. And if you want to get to the destination, you'd be better off you driving than the other person.
Funny thing, you think about like doing a sales demo of some sort, right? The person, like the salesperson is often just talking and the client ends up having to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Totally flipped on its head.
Yeah, they're not really selling anything. They're showing a bunch of stuff, which is why they end up showing the wrong things.
Now, this doesn't only limit us to a demo of something. I mean, this is with our kids. This is at home in our life. This is with our family.
We're capitalists, Chad. We're trying to sell shit.
We're always looking for that opportunity. Yet we're talking about that whole health, wealth, leadership, and legacy, Ben, with these questions, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is to help us resolve conflict.
Sure.
Strengthen our relationships, recruit people, sell people, hire people, even help ourselves. Sometimes I'll sit down with a piece of paper and I'll ask myself questions. And
Why
I'll just
did you
start
eat that cheeseburger last night?
Well, you know
That's
the
right.
answer. We know the answer to that, and it's not even worth diving into. So, next one.
It gets people to open up. Go back to the 36 questions to get somebody to fall in love thing.
Sure.
The very first question is, and I'm making this up, what's your favorite color?
Well, purple.
Yeah. That's not a question that we'd be like, I can't believe, Chad, that you would dare to ask me what my favorite color is. You're like, I like purple, right?
Sure.
So you start asking more and more questions, and over time, it gets more intimate and so on. So I might ask a question like, tell me what happened at your last job. Why'd you leave? And they might say, well, I didn't get along with my boss. Okay, tell me more about that. Well, he said this. How'd that make you feel? How that affected you? Right? And you start asking, you start peeling that onion.
Yep.
Right? And people start opening up. That's why the vast majority of a coaching session or a recruiting session or something with me, somebody in that room is going to end up crying. 50% of the time me, but most likely the other person. Because I've asked them questions that nobody's ever asked that person in their entire life.
Sure, and we've both seen you do that many times to people where you've had that meeting and you'll break them, not in a bad way, you'll break them by showing how much you care about them over other people because of the questions you're actually asking.
Because questions allow us to figure out what the real problem is. And if you aren't committed to doing that, you aren't really committed to helping them, right? The next one is questions lead to quality listening. I read about a relationship therapist who had a great suggestion. And he said, every time my wife had an issue, what I did is I took out a little notebook. I kept it in my back pocket. Apparently she had lots of issues. and when she had a concern, he took out the notebook and he said, would it be okay if I took notes? And he started taking notes at whatever that person was saying. Take notes, take notes, take notes. That serves a variety of purposes. One, forces him to listen because he's not thinking about what he's going to say back to her. Like, that ain't true. That didn't happen. I was home at 8 o'clock. What are you talking about? I took the garbage out, right? He's not arguing or engaging in this at all. He's just simply listening. It leads to quality listening, right? When he's done with that conversation, how does she feel?
Heard,
yeah. Right? Which is 90% of the conflict. They don't even want it fixed.
Were you at my house last night? Like, why are we having this discussion?
Bob, you will soon learn that I'm always listening.
He's like Siri and Alexa, everything. He's
However
everywhere.
creepy that might be, yeah, I'm always listening. And lastly, questions get people to sell themselves on the decision, on the purchase, on the change, right? It helps people to self-discover. And that's what you want. I could easily go to a salesperson and say, what you got to do is you got to double the amount of calls that you're getting.
But they're never going to do that.
No.
They'll do it for an hour and then they'll fall back to who they were.
Yeah, but if I ask you a bunch of questions, say, Chad, tell me about last week. How many sales did you get? Great. That's awesome. Is that enough for you? No, it's not enough. Well, that sucks. How many calls did you make? Well, I made 100. So 100 equaled that amount of sales. How many do you think it would have taken you to make double the amount of sales?
Sure.
Well, that would have taken me 200 calls. That's awesome. If you did double the amount of sales, how would you be doing now financially? Well, how would that make you feel? How would that change your relationship at home? How would that change your finances? How would that change your savings? How would that change your retirement? How would that change the school that your kids are going to go to? How would that change your vacation? As you start dreaming about all these things, how do you feel about that? What do you think the next step for you is? Well, I got to make.
Like, oh my gosh, just get out of the way and let me make my calls already.
I got to make 200 calls. Well, what are you waiting for? Right? And you help them self-discover.
Now, we're not going to go over the whole list again with everybody because they can get it from the book.
Yeah, the 7 powers of questions.
Right, which we'll have the link for so they don't have to go search for the wrong question book.
By the way, that book, I read that book in the last year, and it's held up. You know, it's 25 or 30 years old, but it's definitely held up. It's just as relevant today as it was when it was written.
All right, so Ben, we're talking about asking great questions, and before we hit you with the last question of this episode, what else do you want to talk about in the category of asking great questions and how it can help people?
If you decide that you want to commit to being better at asking questions, you're going to have to take time to learn what sort of questions to ask. Write them down. Brainstorm. For a day, just write down all the questions you could ever imagine on a piece of paper. And then highlight your best ones. And then practice those. That's step 1. Step 2 is you're going to have to learn how to ask them and in what order. Like, I like to ask a question before I ask a question. And if you guys get used to working with me, which you are, you'll hear me say things often like,
Is it okay if I ask you a question? Or
yeah, Bob almost got it, but he missed the key piece. Bob, would it be okay if I asked you another question? Would it be okay if I dug a little bit deeper into that? Bob, would it be okay if I asked you a personal question? And you notice, not the listeners, but Bob, you notice when I do that, I stare at you in the eye, my tone and my volume changes. I become a little bit more soft and gentle or more serious or whatever that might be. And I'm really kind of looking into Bob's soul and I'm giving him a question that he can't refuse. Would it be okay? Sometimes I'll do a variation, Chad. I'll say, would you be offended if?
Sure.
Would you be offended if I asked you a follow-up question? Well, no, I wouldn't. I have great permission to dive into that deeper, and then I'll jump into it. So you got to learn your questions. You got to learn your follow-up questions. You got to learn your tonality and your posture. You got to learn how to look at somebody in the eye and be okay with that waiting, with that pause, right? I'll even do things where I'll take my pen out and I'll put my pen on a piece of paper, waiting for their answer, and then I'll just stare at them, and my hand won't move, waiting for the answer. And I know
by the way, your brain races when that happens.
And I want you to all know it's awkwardly uncomfortable here while Ben has that pen on the paper waiting for Bob to answer.
Questions are power, right? Questions are going to allow you to become a better leader. They're going to allow you to become better in your relationships and your friendships, right? They're going to allow you to get further in life. But we don't practice it. People don't teach it. We don't read about it. My challenge for you all is to do something about it. Make a list of them, study them, read some of the books that we recommend.
All right, Ben, eye contact. Because I have a serious question for you right now that we're going to put out here on behalf of everybody on the podcast.
Oh, shoot.
Because we discuss health, wealth, leadership, and legacy. So, Ben, why did you choose to have that cheeseburger yesterday?
Is that funny?
He's locked in his house. What do you mean? Why?
I didn't have a cheeseburger yesterday. I did not. I was very healthy yesterday. I even did my push-up challenge.
I've seen the video.
Bob can attest to it. So take that, Chad Hyams.
All right. Well, we look forward to learning more about other questions with you soon and what can come from that, Ben. Bob, that was a lot of fun. I mean, there was some good hard moments in there where Ben was giving both of us the look even during the episode. What was your takeaway from that, Bob?
So it's funny you said that. And we didn't talk about this before, but my takeaway is the pause.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm super guilty of this, Chad. Like, I don't like to make people feel uncomfortable. And so I'm often the one who caves, right? I'll ask the question. I know I should just sit there, but after 4, 5, 6 seconds, I get uncomfortable myself because I can sense them kind of squirming in the chair, right? And so I will often fill that gap. And the pause, to me, it's super powerful. I've had Ben do it to me many times to where I'm uncomfortable and then I just open up, right? Like I don't know what I want to say. I'm thinking about it in my mind. I'm tossing over exactly how I want to respond. And he just sits there and eventually like it finally lines up in my brain and then I just start talking, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, I said it during the interview with Ben on this one that he who speaks first loses. Now it's not in a loss sort of way, yet you do want to make sure you are that one that can just wait the other person out because they're just hoping you're going to fill the silence and they don't have to answer the question.
It's a skill that can be developed. I've gotten a little bit better at it. I probably would have been a 2 or 3 second guy before, but now I'm up to 8 or 10 seconds, right? Of like that uncomfortableness, but Ben's a master at it. He can sit there for 30 seconds. I've seen him do it a number of times.
And I think it's the pen on the paper trick that really helps him with that. So that's a great one, Bob. Thanks for sharing that aha and sharing your uncomfortable moments with the rest of us. Remember, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, to subscribe to ours. And if you want to share this episode or any episode of our podcast with a friend, just have them text the word podcast to 59559. One more time, have them text the word podcast to 59559. And until our next episode, wash your hands and remember, do good.